Um, and I just wanted to kind of briefly give you an overview of the work of ActionAid Ireland, because the reason why we're having this event, we published our annual report for 2023, and we wanted to just take a moment to really thank our supporters for helping us to be able to do this work and to reflect a little bit on the challenges that we're facing and everybody is facing globally, but also the impact of our work. So just firstly to say, this focus on women's rights, it really is at the core of what we do. And we also have a human rights-based approach. So that means different things. So we work very directly with women, trying to respond to the needs that they have. But we also do it in a way that looks at it from a human rights-based perspective. So trying to see, where is the state accountable for providing those rights? What are the power dynamics? How can women collectively work together to claim their rights? So this is very much at the heart of ActionAid's work. And the reason why we put women front and center in our approach of looking at poverty globally and in Ireland is because women are, firstly, they're unstoppable leaders for change, and they are engines and drivers of change, but also they experience the effects of poverty and inequality most acutely. So everybody is aware of the climate crisis that we're facing, and women are really bearing the brunt of this climate crisis. So shockingly, women are 14 times more likely to die in a climate emergency than men. 80% of the people displaced during the climate disaster, women. We also know that gender-based violence remains a scourge and a huge problem that we have to tackle globally. And every 11 minutes, a woman experiences domestic violence. And this is a huge issue both in Ireland and globally. And we know so many women have been affected by this. We see it in different forms: intimate partner violence. We see increased gender-based violence during conflict. And then we also see gender-based violence through forced marriages, early child marriages, all of these issues manifesting in different ways. So this is why we put women front and center of our approach to poverty. They face these impacts, but also women at the community level and women's organizations are often at the very heart of seeking changes, not only for themselves, but also for their communities and for other women and girls that they work with. As we reflect back on 2023, it's been a really challenging year and a challenging period. And I think all of us are watching what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank with much, much horror. And I think it's very much to the fore of our mind. We started our response to the absolute slaughter that's happening in Gaza, obviously in 2023, and unfortunately things have just gotten unbelievably worse since then. So we know now it's about 41,000 people that have been killed, 90% of the population displaced, almost 100,000 people really brutally injured. And this is happening, it's happening in the background, something, we're hearing of killings every day, and it's almost become background noise in our worlds. But unfortunately, this level of violence is just so horrific. And it's not just in Gaza that we're seeing conflict. 2023, we saw many areas of conflict. The war in Ukraine is obviously ongoing. And then a very forgotten crisis in Sudan, where millions have been displaced, the famine, the levels of violence, and then also in countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo, we are seeing really horrific levels of violence and really horrific levels of gender-based violence in conflict. So it's a very, very tough world, and we're seeing, conflict growing in this way, gender-based violence, and we're seeing globally the impact of the climate crisis. So we know many, many countries have been really devastatingly affected by this, and Susan will share her experience of this in Kenya, but this is something that is really there, driven by the consumption of fossil fuels, largely in richer countries, that's causing such a devastating impact in the global south. So it is a really challenging world. And as we reflect back on 2023, when we look at our annual report, it's easy, I suppose, to feel despair, to feel despondent. And I think people feel powerless often in the face of what's happening globally and the scale of the challenges when we think of contexts like Gaza, Sudan, the DRC, the level of the climate crisis. And I suppose one of the great privileges we have in ActionAid is to work alongside some of the people who are really at the coalface of many of these crises and bearing the brunt of this. And it is our privilege and honour to be able to work with our partners across countries in the global south who can't lean into despair, who can't give up hope, who have to keep going. And they really amazingly, and I think the really inspirational work that we see around the world and that ActionAid Ireland plays a contribution to. We are small, but we are mighty, and we are really trying to support those working on the front line who are offering the alternative of a different world, where there is some hope for humanity. I think when we see, organizations, individuals at the community level not giving up and continuing to fight for human rights, continuing to fight for gender equality, and continuing to fight for a fairer world. And looking back on 2023, it has been our privilege to support work in different countries around the world. We are grateful to the support of Irish Aid to allow us to work on a gender-based violence programme in Kenya, Nepal and Ethiopia. And then through public fundraising from members of the public, we've also been able to support work in Palestine, in Cambodia, in Vietnam and Uganda as well. And as I look back, I think one of the stories that has stayed with me this year was a woman called Irene in Uganda, and we featured her in our Christmas appeal, and some of you may have seen her. Irene has 7 children, and she is from northern Uganda, an area that was really heavily affected by the conflict with the Lord's Resistance Army. And she experienced really very brutal and very devastating violence from her husband and had to live in a shelter, basically. And ActionAid in Uganda supported her to seek legal advice, to get the proper health support, to be able to live independently with her children. And she then went on to fight for other women and girls so that they wouldn't experience the violence that she did and that they would have the support. So it is women like Irene that I think we draw our hope and inspiration from. And this has been a huge focus of our work, supporting women at the community level, survivors of gender-based violence, but also trying to change laws and policies at the national level as well. In 2023, we were also able to respond to different crises. So to date, we have raised almost 100,000 for Gaza in our appeal. Again, thanks to the huge generosity of the Irish public. And in 2023, we also responded to the Turkey-Syria earthquake, which was so devastating. And we were able to support women-led organizations to respond to that disaster and to be able to provide humanitarian support. We continue to build up our humanitarian response as, unfortunately, the number of emergencies around the world increase. And we're a member of the Irish Emergency Alliance, which is a coalition of organisations that come together to collectively fundraise when a disaster strikes. The final area of our work has been trying to kind of connect this work, very much working with women, changing those systems and structures. So we know our role is to make a difference in women's lives in a practical sense, but also to try to tackle the root causes. And some of those root causes are an economic system that perpetrates gender inequality and that is really not delivering for women's rights, and climate injustice, where we know our use of fossil fuels and large-scale industrial agriculture is having a really devastating impact on the global south. So with the very generous support of one donor, we were able to support a project that was working with women-led solutions at the community level to climate change in Bangladesh. And we also published our own research looking at the role of Ireland's foreign direct investment and how a very shocking amount of money is being channeled through Ireland to big oil and gas companies in the global south through our foreign direct investment. So this speaks to trying to kind of tackle the root causes of many of the issues that we face. I think the big learnings that we've had over the year is that in the face of such a difficult context, we have to keep going and we have to keep supporting and showing that solidarity with women on the front lines, but also with our colleagues and partners across the Federation. And even though we're small in Ireland, our impact is multiplied by 71, given Federation being in 71 different countries, and we're able to have that global reach and be able to respond to different crises and different contexts. And we really could not have done this without our supporters. So it is a huge thank you to you. And this afternoon is a way just to kind of share that impact a little bit with you and to say a huge thank you for your support to ActionAid. None of this is possible without your support. And it's bittersweet, I think, when we look at the challenges in the context to reflect on how scary the world is right now and how dark a place it can be. But that I think by supporting organizations and the women on the front line, we can make a contribution to positive change. And we have to keep going with that. And thank you for your support in that. So I'm going to hand over to Sive O'Neill, who is a board member of ActionAid, and she's going to take us through a conversation with Susan, and we'll have time for any questions that you have as well. Over to you, Sive. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. And firstly, may I apologise for joining the meeting late. I was at another launch that I was on a panel for, and it ran over time, and I didn't know how to leave, situation where there's 350 people there. So I apologize, and I'm sorry that I missed the opening. Did you get a chance to introduce Susan, Carol, or will I just briefly introduce Susan?
I did very briefly, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to be here as a board member and to be able to introduce Susan to the conversation. And so what we thought might be helpful, Susan, if you can describe for us how the climate crisis is unfolding in Kenya and how ActionAid in Kenya is working on the ground with all of the challenges there, with how you're responding and what ways you can connect it to the work that we're doing here in Ireland. So over to you, Susan.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks for the invite, and thanks to everyone who's joined. Most importantly, supporting the work that we do collaboratively between ActionAid Kenya and ActionAid Ireland. Kenya has kind of experience that we can share. I'm going to share today at the impact level, where you get to see that because of climate change, we are having weather patterns that are irregular. Let me talk about the Horn of Africa drought. And we just came to an end, though people are now recovering, because what happened after 5 failed seasons, around October, we had flooding, now continuous flooding. So you're coming out of almost 3 years of drought, and then you get into a flooding season. Now, of course, it starts raining on a day-to-day basis, and women are happy because majorly the communities that were impacted are pastoral communities. So during drought periods, the men would live with the livestock while the women remain at home to take care of the sick, the elderly, and even the children, and take care of themselves as well. So you can imagine they start to plant because it's a season. You're like, okay, we can plant something. And immediately the floods come in. They were displaced from their homes. And as they're being displaced, women again are the first responders. And that really resonates with why within this collaboration with ActionAid Ireland, we target women to build their capacity because they're the first responders. They bear the burden. If you want to see the effect of drought and flooding, you will see it on women and girls, unfortunately, in the communities that were affected. The northeastern part, we had parts where we had landslides, mudslide, immediately when you're trying to recover from drought. So it became another life that they had to lead. People lost property because when homes are flooded, and you know how when flooding happens, it's not like a drought that comes as a slow onset, but it's something that is so abrupt. Sometimes there are areas where it's not raining, but because upstream it's rained a lot, it comes, and if you're downstream, it comes to where you are, then the whole place is flooded, and that's it. You have to be moved, you have to be evacuated. And you're being evacuated, roads have broken down. We could not access women, for instance, in Garissa, we could not access them. With food items, we had to wait for government. If they're flying a chopper, then they would take the food. We had people who capsized while transporting the food because of the massive rain. So those were the impacts. But going to the women and girls, when there's drought, naturally and from a cultural perspective, women put food on the table. And so when a woman is putting food on the table, it means she has to estimate if the food will be enough. And you're in a drought context, so it means it's not enough in the first place. So majority of the women, they would tell us, we can't eat before our children, we can't eat before our spouses, our husbands, therefore we have to wait. But sometimes it's not even enough for the children. So they would go without food. Culturally, women tie their stomachs when they are mourning or when in pain. So many of them resolve to that as a system of survival. So you'd see a woman tying, we call it leso, they tie the shawls, the wrappers, but it's not that they are mourning, but they're trying to tighten the tummy so that they can manage the hunger pangs. We had girls drop out of school. One, they had to drop out of school to walk with their mothers distances of 20 kilometers to come back with a 20-liter of water. And when you're back home, you're not a priority in terms of even your own personal hygiene. So that then moves into the health, the STI, infectious diseases, and the sacrifice is that you've brought the water, you either cook with it or drink it, but you don't shower with it. And so when they came back home, some of them would walk through very areas that are very unsafe. Women were raped, young girls were raped. First, you dropped out of school, then there's the child labor element, because when it's beyond the normal support that a child would want to give, or for their own, just necessitating themselves, you find that it would go into child labor. They could even be picked to go fetch water that would be taken to a family that can pay them so that they get money to buy food. So there were elements of child labor. There were elements of instances of early child pregnancy, because like in an area in the eastern part of Kenya, we have the motorbikes, business people. In Kenya, we call them border. And so they would help carry water. They can carry like 20-liter containers, and then you buy from them. But when you go as a young girl, and even some of the women, they would say, I know you can pay money, but pay me differently. And that is a sexual favor for you to get. So some of the young girls got pregnant, some women, it moved into domestic violence, and even domestic violence that would be exacerbated because of, first you have to ask for money for food. The person you're asking left in the morning, got nothing. You also went away to do some menial jobs, you got nothing, and you're back home. And so that element of not being able to provide eroded dignity, especially the men, and that would really brought a lot of violence on the women. And so part of what we did in the programming, number one was to intervene. We provided some of the basic requirements, the food rations that a family could survive on, water as well, but also within ActionAid, we work on their safety and security. whereby they would report cases of violation, connecting the women and the networks that we've built so that you're able to tell each other this area is unsafe, but you're also able to alert each other in the connections that there's food in this area, it is safe, it's being distributed at this hour, go between this hour and this hour. So women they started watching out for each other. And those were the networks that we really promoted. For the girls, we also did distribution of sanitary towels in the schools. So that would keep them in schools. And then there was also the school feeding program, where some of the children, before we started like the school feeding program, and majorly where we work is quite extreme poverty. And in that case, then even government food distribution can only get to a certain extent. So where we got in and supported the schools, one of the schools, there's a girl who came and fainted on day one. And so the teacher tried to find out, and she said they've not eaten for 2-3 days, and that's why she was not coming to school. So when we started the food school feeding, many young students started going to school. They would get porridge and get lunch. And so it kept them in school. But that also helped us because part of the program and the collaboration with the ActionAid Ireland is to mobilize for policies, because that is long-term and it's durable, and it gives the responsibility, the burden of care also on the government. And so with such examples, we would actually go to the county government and even national government and ask, why is food not getting to these areas? Why are we not taking the right food? How are we involving the communities? And it was not even for us as staff, but the women and the girls that we were ready to face their own leaders to be able to push for the support that they received. Of course, in some of the communities here in Kenya, some of them, early child marriage is like a cultural practice, despite the fact that it's outlawed. But what happens, there's even the double barrier on the woman. Before you're married in that community, then you have to go through the female genital mutilation as a cultural practice that determines that now you are a woman. And it happens at 12, 13, 14. And so young girls, immediately after that, they would be married off. But the parents are not just marrying them off because now they've gone through the practice and they are ready for marriage culturally, but they marry them off to reduce the burden of they call it, we are reducing the number of mouths that we are feeding. So if a girl gets married, it's the business of her husband and the family that she's married to. But remember, she's getting married to a man who can pay dowry. In essence, the family is also restocking. So they take that also as a means of restocking. But at the end of the day, it's the women, it's the girls who really suffered through both during the drought season and the flooding season. But one of the most important thing is in our implementation and collaboratively, we've always worked with the women. We worked with their communities. They came up to tell us what they needed. Some said, we just need sanitary towels. First, we can't bathe. There's no water. What can you give us? So we packaged dignity kits that would have the sanitary soap, panties for the young girls or family members. And it surprised us. Some of the girls would say, we share some of these things because if I'm on my periods, I will put it on and use the sanitary, and my other sister would take it and use it. So these were the experiences that they went through. But the approach where we talk to them, we ask them what they want to see us do, how they want to engage with the county government, that participation and being located with the community brought a lot of success for us in the program. Yeah, I can stop there for now.
Thank you, Susan. Wow, that's a very sobering account of the reality for women and girls in parts of Kenya where you're working. And I'm just interested, before we move on, in like what are the sort of scenarios for climate change in Kenya looking like, and what efforts or what work are you doing to engage with the government on preparing for future events? Because as you said, like the flooding tends to happen very suddenly and it's very traumatic and very extreme. But you know, the likelihood is that more of these extreme weather events are in the pipeline. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you're engaging with that.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of working with the community and working majorly with the county governments, there's the exercise that they have to do. We call it territorial diagnosis, where they are able to map, especially for flooding, they're able to map the risky areas that people ought not to be living in. And that at least then helps them to move to some safe zones. But it's not easy, you know, we are cultural people in Africa. We really embed culture into our day to day. Somebody can even tell you, why am I leaving my father's grave to move into another land? You see, the things that they value, the spiritual elements that they value. But majorly, we have focused on livelihood. How do we help them to increase the food production, but also doing it in a manner that it can withstand the weather shocks?
Yeah.
Agroecology became one major approach that we embarked on, whereby it's friendly to the environment, and it also produces food, but it also saves on, it also secures the soil and the land. And so there's a mixed farming that communities would engage in. The other thing that we also did, when you look at climate change, and right now people are talking about carbon credit, carbon market, carbon sinking, carbon financing, terminologies and processes that are coming in because of climate change. We continue to work with women on land ownership so that when they own the land, they can negotiate. They can determine what to plant. When you've trained them on what to plant, but they can only access land but not own it, you find that sometimes the other members of the family can come and make a decision that cash crop is better. And so you have cash crop but no food. But when they have ownership, they can also be part of the decision makers. We have embarked also on a women economic empowerment program, whereby we teach them of alternatives. So if the community is a pastoral community and all the livestock is gone, what alternative income generating activity can you engage in? Some of the women went back. You know, I tell people, when you go back into your drawer and get out that talent, the passion that you had. Some started small businesses. Some would cook and supply food. Some of them went into tailoring. Some opened shops that they can actually sell small items. And that became an alternative source of income for the women, because then they are able to put something on the table. And so with time, as the livestock is, the numbers are diminishing, there's still the trading business that they could do. And then, of course, the drought-resistant crops is also one of the things that we promoted, the drought-resistant crops, ensuring that the crops can withstand a period of drought. But of course, as I'd said, almost 3 years of drought, that simply means, 2 years of drought, it simply means you can only withstand it or be resilient up to a certain level. And beyond that, then again, you are eroded and back into depending on food distribution and support from a humanitarian support. Yeah.
Fantastic. My gosh, you're doing an awful lot. It's hard to keep up with all of that. I hope that everyone is as impressed as I am. with ActionAid Kenya and everything you're trying to do in a massive country, you know, with really significant challenges, particularly facing women and girls. So my instructions are that we now have 15 minutes for a Q&A. So if you like, you can type a question into the chat box, or perhaps, Carol, it's okay if people unmute themselves and just ask it directly. Is that okay? So, or you can just come on in if you like, and I'm happy to kind of share that. So you can type in a question if you want me to read it out, or and I presume the questions can go to Carol or to Susan. Yeah.
Yeah, great. We'd love people to ask any questions.
Great. And we have a question here from Ita Lane for Susan, I think. What parts of Kenya do you work in?
Thank you. So we are in 22 counties, but the collaboration with the ActionAid Ireland, we work in Kilifi County. We also work in Taita Taveta County. And then we also work in Garissa County. There's also work that goes on in Homa Bay County. So in terms of the communities where we work, so and with all these four, sometimes it's difficult to say that we work in 1, 2, 3, 4 with ActionAid Ireland, because we do target policy change and advocacy and campaign work at national level, and especially now also talking about climate change. We look at how do we influence not only national but also regional engagements and also global engagement. So in Kenya, those are the areas where we are in, and then building onto the national engagement with the outcomes of the work that we do. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I'm sure she probably knows part of Kenya. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Asante, Susan.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience there? Anything at all about the 2023 report or ActionAid's work in Kenya or the Federation as a whole? And just while we're waiting for people to come in there, I have to say I was reading the 2023 report this morning, and it's a wonderful read, because it captures so much of what's kind of going on in the world in terms of the challenges that we face, geopolitical, the climate crisis, problems of power and domination, and the vulnerability of women and girls in so many countries, including Ireland in places. And it's so inspiring to read about the work of a small organization like ActionAid Ireland, and how we're able to connect with similar like-minded organizations in our federation internationally, and you know, take on the challenges in the spirit of kind of inquiry as well as solidarity. So the annual report is very easy to read. It's not dull like you expect annual reports to be, and it's full of great stories, and I think it's important to keep ourselves encouraged that the work we're doing and the money that people are donating is making a difference. It's making a real difference on the ground. So any more questions? I wonder, Carol, do you have any questions for Susan?
Well, I feel like Susan and myself speak quite a bit, but yeah, I guess let me think of a question. I mean, Susan, one thing that would be interesting, because it's been a very tumultuous year for Kenya. And some of you may have seen there was significant youth protests around a particular austerity measure that the government was going to introduce, and it was very violent, the reaction to it. So I wondered, Susan, maybe just about reflecting on that and just sharing, because I suppose one of the things that I think about this year is that we kind of have this funny situation as an organization. We fund, we're our strong emphasis on human rights, and human rights only come to life when governments realize human rights. But actually this year has been so extraordinarily challenging in, you know, your just belief in governments and institutions doing what they should be doing, that sometimes you can get very disillusioned with governments actually, you know, doing any of this. And when you think about the fact of Gaza going on for as long as it is, our faith in human rights and the ability of governments to protect human rights can be undermined. And I think if I can take anything positive out of this absolute horror, it would be that people power has been very strong this year in solidarity amongst people. And, you know, we have seen young people consistently focusing on the climate crisis. And we have also seen, you know, thousands of people every month in Ireland marching around Gaza. And I think there was something similar in Kenya with young people, that, you know, young people really changed the situation. I know it came at a huge cost of people's lives as well. But I just wondered if you had any reflections about that, Susan, about kind of the power of young people in Kenya and what they have achieved. Maybe people don't know the context, so maybe just explain a little what happened.
Yeah, thank you so much. What started as people contributing and giving their voices and content that they felt they wanted to see in the finance bill, and culmination of the process, and the sharing of the bill that was therefore to be debated. It started as a process, a consultative process in a way by the government, and the CSOs gave their comment, their views, did their contributions. But when the finance bill was shared, together with the appropriation bill, it was totally way out of what was expected. What did Kenyans expect? Kenyans expected some reduction on the taxes, because we are really taxed as a country. They expected the government first to disclose what is the debt that this country owes, before we could go now and start talking about what we are going to pay. So until today, it is not very, very clear how much we owe as a country. It will surprise you that it is not clear, but it is known that Kenya's public debt as at June 2024, for instance, was 10.6 trillion. And the servicing cost was 1.85. So this information, and the advantage of the civil society is that this information was being collected and shared. And the young people are very active online. But again, the programs that have continually been implemented have been targeting the empowerment of young people, building their capacity, and also linking them with the right institutions to either air their concerns or to challenge systems and processes. And so it started off as an online mobilization. Just to tell you that the initial trigger for the young people was the fact that there was taxation that was going to be put on online businesses, the gig economy, that bit. And that was what kept growing the anger, together with the additional information that people kept hearing about, together with the clear knowledge that there's corruption and it was growing. And then the blatant disregard of people, our suffering, people's cry, and even lack of involvement. By the way, we lose around 608 billion Kenya shillings. Sorry, I'm giving you in Kenya shillings annually to corruption. And so when the young people came on the stage, it was that the finance bill should not pass. And that was a cry that the CSOs had talked about, the opposition had spoken about, and nothing was changing. And that's how the young people mobilized themselves online and went into the physical demonstration, and the finance bill was not signed. But apparently the appropriation bill was signed. And so where the monies that were available were to be spent were still allocated and spent. But that kept the young people on the streets, because it brought in concerns of any other action that needed had caused public outcry and had not been taken into consideration. So the debt crisis was one of the most critical concerns that Kenyans had. And the young people imagining the way you calculate debt, they were imagining that they're going to pay debts that so this is how they say it: we will pay debts that our fathers took, and they never ensured that they were going to pay while they were alive. And then, of course, I've mentioned corruption and the arrogance that was also there in the leadership. But what saved the day was that there was enough information that the young people could access to be able to challenge any misinformation that existed or any misrepresentation that the government did. And we've seen that as what we are calling as a citizen-led actions coming into reality, which has been what ActionAid as a whole has been championing. Majority of the young people were young people that we have trained, but because ActionAid was put on the government radar, we were also careful not to expose their names because they wanted names. Some of us, like myself, my name and everything else was circulated, tapped. I would find the police, of course, the plainclothes, the CID, just around my house. But if you're convicted, if you have the courage of conviction, you'll ensure that the right thing is done. And this is what the young people have brought back again to the country. Thank you, Carol.
Sive, you're on mute.
Yeah. Sorry, that's such an inspiring story, Susan. Thank you so much for that. Really, really interesting. Desmond Lynch has put a question in the chat here about deforestation. He says, Kenya has suffered with deforestation. Have you any views about the various mangrove trees afforestation projects in Kenya, and are they helping the local populations?
Yeah, thank you so much. And this is majorly in the coastal areas. In Kilifi County, where we work, there are projects that are currently being supported just to ensure that there's a regeneration, I would call it, of the mangrove trees. There's a lot of advantage that we talk about even when we are engaging with the community is the fact that it helps to conserve the environment, but it also helps to restore the blue. So we just say blue economy. You know, the problem with the civil society, we pick a terminology and it becomes our day-to-day food. Yeah, to restore. And that has been what the communities in the coastal area, especially Kilifi, where we work, it has been a focus that when you're next to the ocean, what is it that the communities are doing? What is also beneficial to the community is that right now they know that when they go into the mangrove, the area, what they need not to do is to pick out what could have fallen and dried down out there, because it's supposed to form cover and to help conserve that environment as also as a way of also enabling them that they are now able to move a little bit deeper as the mangrove trees grow. The level of I don't know how to put it. You know, before they kept seeing that the sea levels were moving towards them, but with the mangroves, there's how do you call it? Control
erosion. So it stops
exactly.
the coastal erosion.
It stops that, and they are able to go in a little bit deeper to be able to fish and even fish better. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great. I'd say we've time for another question or two if anybody else has anything they want to ask. And thank you for your patience and your time with us, Susan. It's been fascinating. Has anybody any questions? Carol, I don't know if we have no more questions. Should we start to wrap?
We can. Yeah, thank you so much to everybody for joining and for your support, and a big thank you to Susan. I always love listening to Susan because you can go to Kenya in your mind when you listen to her, because she makes it come to life so well. So thank you so much, Susan, and for all the work that you guys do. And thank you to our supporters. I think we've one last question there from Margaret. Margaret, do you want to come in? Maybe she didn't mean to put her hands up. Margaret, you're on mute, just in case you're trying to get in. No, I don't think so. So maybe, yeah, we could finish up there. Thanks so much, everyone. And thanks to you, Sive.
Thank you so much for inviting me. So the last thing on the agenda is some closing remarks from you, Carol, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think not much to add. Just to say, kind of reflecting back on 2023, we're very proud of the impact that we've had and proud of our work in Ireland. And, I feel like it's a very much a partnership with our supporters. We actually raise more from public fundraising than we get from any other source. About 2/3 of our income comes from public fundraising and 1/3 from a partnership with ActionAid and some other trusts and foundations. So all of this work and solidarity with women in the Global South is only possible because of the support of people in Ireland. So it just makes such a huge difference. And in 2024, we're continuing our focus on our priority areas, addressing gender-based violence, women's leadership in emergencies and disasters, and then trying to look at some of the systemic issues around economic justice and climate justice. So they're very much our ongoing priority. And obviously, within that, the focus and response to Gaza is very much to the fore at the moment, as a major priority for us. So yeah, thank you for joining, and we look forward to sharing the impact of 2024. And thanks so much.